episode of What Works, How to Handle Life's Biggest Challenges and Questions. Today I have Shelley Pearce here with me. Hello, Shelley.
Hello, Johnny.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So let's give the listener a chance to get to know a little bit who this person is if they haven't met you before. So I'll let you say something about who you are.
Okay. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist here in Santa Monica, California, although now it's pretty well international because I also do spiritual counseling. It's a third career for me. I started out in the investment world out of college 30 years ago, and then I worked in the arts for many years, directing a conservatory. And my life path has brought me to therapy. I had obviously had been counseling people for most of my adult life in different realms. But one of the ways I came to this path was with the diamond approach and diamond logos work, right? So I read some of C.M.H.I.M.P's books, and that sort of redirected my personal path and then my professional path.
And so let's just stop there for a second. If someone don't, probably some people don't have a clue what the diamond approach is. Could you say something about what drew you into that, and just a couple of words of what it is?
Well, it's a psycho-spiritual path to realization, I guess you would say, and it started 40 years ago with two teachers, C.M.H.I.M.P and Faisal Muqaddam, and Karen Johnson as well. And I came to it through L.M.F.T's books. I think he's written 19 books, the first of which that I read was The Point of Existence. And I just simply walked into a bookstore and saw the book, and I thought, that's an interesting title.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I've just, my life has taken a very circuitous path. And so I was in that work and have been a private student of Faisal Muqaddam's for 14 years now.
Yeah.
And in that time became licensed as a psychotherapist.
Yeah. So probably we'll get in touch with some of those, the knowledge from that kind of tradition too in this conversation. But if is there something else you think one should know about you before we dive into the content?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. I think maybe it will come out as we speak.
Yeah, it will probably. So I'm thinking to start this conversation about life's biggest challenges. It's a struggle to be alive sometimes. So I like the word patterns. So instead of talking about disease or wrong or right, I like the word pattern. So if I would start this conversation with asking you, what are the patterns that you have experienced during your work with people, maybe with yourself, that doesn't help us? What kind of patterns have you experienced that we seem to get caught up in life?
Well, I'll start by saying, in terms of patterns, I think about it in a lot of different ways. So, maybe patterns, structures, characterological structures. There are lots of ways in which we refer to them. And in the postmodern world, we sort of compress the hierarchy, so we're not pathologizing, right? It's more like, what are your tendencies? How do you walk through life, right? And so a lot of the work is attachment based, right? And at this point, I think there are 6 levels of attachment that have been identified, right? And so that's one starting point for identifying different patterns in a person's life, especially for those of us who do a lot of couples work, which I know you do as well, and family work. So I think that's one way of starting. Like in the first minute of conversation, you kind of get a sense of someone's attachment pattern just by how they talk about their lives. Do they like to read and spend a lot of time alone, or are they extroverts and love going to parties?
Yeah.
So that's a starting point.
Yeah. And when if you see some kind of attachment pattern, do you, how, if you go into the practical, I like to be practical, so
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is helpful with that knowledge? How is that helpful for you and the client to use the attachment theory or story or knowledge?
Yeah, you know what? I think with attachment and almost everything else, in the room or on video now, as it were, or on phone, um, the way that I usually work is trying to bring into balance
Mm,
whatever's out of balance, right? So if someone is more avoidant, I'm talking about how do they make more connection. If
mm,
someone's overly dependent or sort of neurotic in relationship, it's how to create more healthy autonomy.
mm,
And it's the same thing with the way a person shows up in a session, right? So if they tend to be more loquacious, and then slowing things down and trying to balance that, or if someone's much more quiet, trying to balance that.
mm,
So I think that's the main thing that, as a counselor, that you key into almost immediately.
mm.
How do I bring balance into this conversation, into their lives, into their relationships?
So you try to be some kind of finding the balance within the relationship with that person, and then you start to investigate or explore what kind of life situation it is.
Yeah.
So let me be really naive and say, but why are people suffering, Shelley? What's that all about? How do you define suffering, or the basic pain of being alive? What is it?
Gosh, that's a big question.
Yeah, no.
I, you know, I think of, I honestly think of the way we come into the world, maybe uniquely, but I think there are essentially four areas that we're sort of born with,
Mm,
right? Our intelligence, our health, the way we appear, and our moods.
mm,
And so, I will often just say to some people, if they have a major mood disorder, right? Well, listen, at least you're lucky you have these other three things that you came into the world with.
mm,
People have two or less. Maybe I don't talk about that. So I think to some degree, it's just what we're born with.
mm,
What are as the some work would say, how our soul station enters into the world. I think there's a lot that has to do with what happens in vitro
mm,
and in the birth process, in the first 2 years of life, in terms of how we perceive our environment, especially tone of voice of our family, of our parents. I think that's what we absorb most, the vibration of tone of voice, and that affects us. And then obviously trauma is a huge contributor to any kind of dysfunction. I mean, it has been the buzzword now for years, and you know there's a reason for that. I mean, it really you could come into the world with a fabulous start, and a couple good traumas could really debilitate anybody. So you take that along with what's going on in the world, the existential fear that is pervasive now, and our teenage population is, I mean, from all accounts, it's always been between age 15 to 20, the majority of disorders happen, whether it's anxiety, all sorts of mood disorders, right to schizophrenia, right? It's those 5 years, those teenage years. And right now it's the worst it's ever been since we've been recording those sorts of things, the sorts of statistics. So,
could I ask you a question?
sure.
I know two words that often show up. Maybe trauma is the most frequent now. Stress used to be. Maybe it's both. I don't know. But how, just to be sure I don't misinterpret you, what do you mean when you say trauma? What's if we're talking suffering, what is it? If I were sitting here and listening to this and wondering, do I have trauma? What do you mean when you say trauma?
Well, I often talk about trauma as something like, a major death or a car accident or, some sort of physiological event, or, but also what I refer to as mini traumas, right? Which could be stress for a period of time every single day for a year, or, every month, or, I mean, it could be a lot of contributors, and I think the level of stress that one system can handle varies quite a bit. So what one person would handle as just, a stressful event in their lives, a more sensitive being might handle as a complete trauma and not be able to forget it. And then, of course, our minds are conditioned to have a negative bias to keep us safe, right? So the thing that happens is the most extreme, intense, and negative experiences are the ones that stand out in our memory the most.
And before this interview, it was a couple of things I was really curious to give you a chance to talk about, and we're kind of heading that way. So I'm going to start asking questions about. You were talking about memory, and the kind of you get into, even it can happen without trauma. You have this kind of a narrative going on in your head that you're hopeless and it won't work and everybody's against me and stuff like that. So listening to you before this interview, I know you have a way of trying to not only be in the talk therapy tradition of being in that kind of way of being in therapy. You also try to connect to the body, and that I find really interesting to hear some more thoughts about that, especially when talking about trauma and stress and stuff that really invades the whole system. Could you share some thoughts about how you connect the body into the therapy room?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, going back to bringing balance to a conversation, I think it's critically important to stay sort of aware of what's happening with body language, with tensions in the body. It shows up a lot in tone of voice. I can, especially in this past year during COVID, doing so many phone sessions, you can sense in a nanosecond when somebody's energy shifts because their tone of voice shifts. And one of the most important things in my work anyway is keying into that and then being able to stop, go into some silence, feel into the body, feel into a certain level of, okay, where's the tension, and where is it a little bit more relaxed, and can you stay with that? And I think so much of the way that anxiety plays out is really running away from the tensions that are held. And, in the diamond approach, there's something, I think it's probably the biggest contribution to psychotherapy itself is it's referred to as the theory of wholes. And it's, essentially when let's say a trauma happens as a young person, or you're treated badly by a parent, you're not only not seen, but seen as something different than what's actually happening in your experience. It creates a contraction in the body, in the energetic body, let's just say, and then that gets held in our body for decades, right? It's sort of like I think of it as a molecular manifestation of holding. And so, you know, from a psychological standpoint, you might call that defensive layers, right, that keep building up and building up. And so just by moving into a place as a, you know, as a professional, we kind of know those moments when something's happened, lots of ways to detect that. But whether you're hearing it or seeing it, or it's somebody is saying something, to be able to stop in that moment and really just, okay, what's happening right now, and can you move your awareness, which really is associated with the prefrontal cortex, as opposed to, you know, the amygdala, the brainstem, where all of the cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine are, you know, being produced, to move from an awareness that comes from a separate part of the brain, a more linear thinking part of the brain, toward some area in the body that one can feel something, you know, some sort of density, or muddiness, or tightness, whatever it is, and just staying with that, just staying with that area in the body, it starts to morph. It really starts to transform, and within a few seconds, it starts to change.
Yeah, and that is so amazing to complement the earlier. It's always good to talk about what you're experiencing, but to get that actually almost like body work. I was thinking when you talked about it, to actually go into the body and stay with the contracted area, or what name you will give it. So and it kind of melts, or gets a little bit looser. So what's happening there? Yeah.
You know, I just, and the other thing that I don't know about other therapists, but for me, coming from that empathic, almost sympathetic resonance state, I'm actually feeling it in my body as well. So, you know, if I'm working with someone who really suffers from anxiety, you know, I can feel it almost immediately. I mean, just, and it's the same thing with moving into various areas in the body. I wouldn't even say I'm following the client. It's more like it's just happening. There's just a resonance that so oftentimes before they even say, well, I'm feeling tightness here, I'm already feeling it in my body.
Yeah. And so I was thinking about what you said earlier, that a common pattern is, of course, that you want to run away from these uncomfortable feelings, or sensations. So how do you help in a safe way people to stay with that? What do you do?
Stay in the silence, encourage. Can you just stay with that? Can we just stay right here for a moment, just a moment? Would it be okay to just keep your awareness on that place in your body? One of the things that I think is an important thing to transmit is the actual physiology of it. So when you have your awareness on a particular part of your body, studies show that blood flow increases to that area, which actually means more oxygen goes to that area. So it's not just a mental thing.
No.
You know, it's physiological, it's energetic. I think it is spiritual for those people who, you know, come from that orientation in the Diamond Logos work. We talk about essence
Yeah.
as actually a substance that flows through your body. You know, if you think about that coming from the Sufi ideology of 5,000 years ago, or you think about it now, I mean, what would essence of love be? Well, it's dopamine, right? It's
Yeah.
endorphins, it's serotonin,
Mhm.
right? So what they had been teaching thousands of years ago, we know as chemistry,
Mhm.
and we can actually allow that or bring that into our experience
Mhm.
within ourselves. It's an inner quality.
It's already there, but you can have some kind of, what, I don't know what the right word is, blockage, or
Exactly.
don't know that you have it. If you're always looking for something outside of yourself, so you kind of be, it's trying to look at your own eyes. It can be hard to realize that it's been there all the time. But the essence part you were talking about, and you were talking about silence. So could we go into that kind of, now it's going to become a bit challenging, at least for me, because this is where language starts to fall apart, and it's really hard to nail it down in words. How do you talk about silence? You kind of always getting into the map instead of the territory.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you have, you, that it's really a tool for you to work with silence. And can you say something about that? Because I don't hear you talking about, when you were talking about contractions and staying with the feeling, you're not really in there doing interventions. You're just being with it.
Exactly.
So and so could you say something about just being in silence, or using silence, or whatever words you want to use, to how does that, how is that healing or helpful?
Well, you know, it's such a great and subtle question, right? I mean, when we've had conversations, and just being able to stop and have eye contact and feel what's happening in that moment without any words,
Yeah.
right? Being able to have a few exhales in that place of, okay, we don't have to fill every moment with words. We don't, as therapists, have to have an intervention up our sleeve at every moment, right? That silence is very healing, and I think the that um, the degree to which someone can stay in silence, when you can help them stretch that out a little bit,
Mm.
where it can be 3 seconds,
Mm. Yeah.
5 seconds, and maybe you can actually sit. I mean, you know, I know in my work with Faisal, we, especially in the beginning, we might sit in silence for 3 minutes,
Mm.
in working together,
Mm.
and it's a completely different route. I mean,
Yeah.
all sorts of things come up. It's almost a little bit like the maybe I don't know, but a little bit like a blank slate Freudian kind of thing, where where the unconscious really came alive for the first time, I think, in a formal way, in an academic way. But it actually, we've become so accustomed to just filling every single moment,
Yeah.
that being able to just be present, feel yourself in your body, feel the other person in that space as well, even on video.
Yeah.
I really, in fact, in video sessions like this, there is a place where I'm planted in my being, you're planted in your being, and there's a connection. So there's a merging, even though we're, what, I don't know, 8,000 miles away.
Yeah. 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 It's fascinating. Let me stay with the this silence and it's not. Let me introduce. Let's dig a little bit deeper in this. So I think that when we're in a relationship, we're constantly responding or reacting. So we're kind of in activity, and silence helps to slow down the activity. But also, which is fascinating, is that without anybody else in the room, there's also an activity within the mind as we have the feelings in the body and thoughts in our head, who also is helped. And I know we've talked before, and how you can slow down that kind of activity, and then the gaps come between.
Mm-hmm.
That's the silence that is not effortless, and also where creativity and you surprise yourself with thoughts that if I go to myself, if I want to achieve something, I get into performance, and it's easy that you get locked. If you want to play an instrument or something, you're going to do the best you can. You're not getting in touch with that kind of space where the creativity kind of flows. But that's the behind the thoughts and feelings. There's some kind of quality that is really effortless and really wants to just get
Out.
get out. Yes. and I when you talk, I think that's so it's almost like we're going to get unemployed, Shelley, if everybody figured this out, because it's a lot of good stuff that happens when you get quiet within the whole system, not just the head or the body. Yeah.
For sure. And it also requires a level of presence that we will never be unemployed, Johnny.
And maybe not. Maybe not.
Because, you have to be able to hold the field for whatever's there.
Mm,
And once you're with someone who can hold that field, let's say deeper and longer than
mm.
you can, then you're out of business.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, but I think there's something else that really has to do with an embodied empathy
Mm,
that sets the stage for that. That is not. It's not just about word. I mean, yes, you need empathic words. You need to be able to say, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that," and frankly, in the English language, there are not very many words. If you say you're sorry, people say that's okay,
mm.
as if you're trying to take responsibility for it. I mean, it's really not. We could really use to create more words for being empathic, but there's something about holding the field with a certain level of presence that is uh, um, kind and gentle and soft and soft in its femininity, but strong in its like a masculine strength in that it's unwavering. So it doesn't matter what comes into the field, what comes into the room, what comes into the mind, what comes into the bodily felt sensation, that it can be held and it's okay.
Mm.
And I think of it a little like in the Catholic tradition, I think the best thing about Catholicism is confession. It's the first thing that gets thrown out. People as soon as they get old enough, I'm not going into that booth and telling all my sins. But in therapy, when you actually share the deepest, darkest, most shadowy parts of yourself that are embarrassing and shameful, and they're held with a certain presence of equanimity, it shifts the held sensations in the body. You know, Anybody who has felt that, who has felt like when they've shared something really difficult and it was held and even honored for being shared as opposed to being judged, the system relaxes.
Yeah.
And so there's something in those silent moments that it's probably the most profound aspect of a healthy therapeutic relationship.
Yeah. So is this because I know you trained from a postmodern point of view, and a narrative therapy is as part of what you trained to, but where did you learn this? How come this is a part of what you do now? It doesn't sound like traditional schooling, or where does it come from?
You know, gosh, it's a really good question. I will say that my colleague that that really taught me so much as I was in my training. His name is Robert Strock. He's written a book called Awareness That Heals, and he's truly a brilliant therapist, and he can hold the field of empathy for people's deepest vulnerabilities in a way that I mean, it's really a gift of grace, honestly. And I would say he's got, I don't know, 8 or 10 ways of working that are highlighted in his book that I've actually lived with him. And so that's been a huge part of my becoming becoming a therapist, becoming a good therapist, really. And so it was direct experience, really.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Of having that field being held, and actually, I mean, once you experience it once,
Yeah.
with someone, with a therapist or counselor or friend or anyone, once you experience it once, I really believe it creates an unparalleled heart connection.
Yeah.
Right. And once that happens, and you know the trust is there, and it shifts some sense of your being, and you know, in the Diamond Heart, you would say essence flows. In a therapeutic sense, you would say there's some sort of relaxation of the nervous system, right? And if that happens over and over again, right, it actually shifts how you show up in the world.
Yeah.
Meditation is a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think of, you know, 3 pieces. Let's take out prayer, because I know we're not really probably talking to a spiritual crowd. So let's just move that piece out. But when you think about meditation and inquiry and contemplation, particularly inquiry, I think of it as...
Can you say what inquiry means for those who maybe don't familiar with that kind of word?
Okay, so I mean, you know, it could be simple questioning, but it's more formally called inquiry, and I think it came from, you know, the Socratic inquiry, but from a psychological standpoint, psychospiritual standpoint, where you're asking the deepest question of yourself, whatever that may be, right? And you actually give yourself a certain amount of time to answer it. So it's not just, oh, I wonder why I have this pattern, and you're out the door, right?
No.
It's, you know, what is this pattern, and what do I know about it myself? And let's say you give yourself 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I have people actually, you know, I time it. right? So what happens is when you actually go into that deeper part of yourself to inquire,
Mm.
the first couple answers that come up are what you know.
Yeah.
I do this because my mom did that, and whatever it is. And then you still have, let's say you're giving yourself 5 minutes or 10 minutes for an inquiry. The first minute, it's everything you know. The second minute, you go into silence,
Mm.
right? And what comes out is really what's in the subconscious that's there, but you've never really looked at, you've never had insights about. And it's almost like, for those of us who have to write, or who enjoy writing, either way, it's like when you decide, okay, this is the subject I'm writing on, and you sit at the keyboard,
Mm.
and the subject, what you want to write, but you literally go into a state of silence for a moment, an extended moment, whatever, until something comes out.
Mm.
It's the same thing in
Yeah.
psychospiritual work,
Yeah.
right? But it's coming out of our subconscious. And so for me, that's a really important piece of entering into silence and having a truly liberating and creative dynamism come out of that, because you learn so much about yourself,
Yeah.
right? And then in terms of the meditation piece, if if silent meditation, let's just say it's just a simple breathing meditation, what you're doing is training yourself to sit in that state.
Yeah.
Good stuff may come out of it as well,
Mm.
but it's different than inquiry or contemplation, where you're really saying, okay, what is it I want to know about my experience in life?
And from, so a lot of what you're talking about now is experience based, or if you try it, then you get something out of it. It might sound like it's a difficult thing, we got to go through all these layers, but my own experience is you quite fast can get, maybe I'm not a deep guy, but just a couple of questions, if you stay with them, all of a sudden you're there, and interesting stuff shows up, both in a good way and maybe a bit scary way sometimes. But it's, I always think of it like we're not that complicated that we think we are sometimes. You just stay with a question, and you will find the answer will show up, but you have to have that kind of patience and sit with it. I had a quote before when I was researching a little bit what we were going to talk about. I read this quote and I thought it suits a little bit of what you practice. It's Blaise Pascal, who back in the 1600s said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Yeah, this is really something to that, to be able to sit and regulate yourself and go into some kind of new areas within. So you got inquiry, you got meditation. Did you say three things? Was it something more?
Contemplation.
Contemplation.
I think of inquiry as much more formal,
Yeah.
right? Where there's a direct question, and then you're going into the silence, and it's that specific thing that you're really mining.
Mm.
Um, I think contemplation can be much broader,
Yeah.
and I think of it's sort of like in meditation, it's the stable ground. In inquiry, it's more active. In
Mm.
contemplation, it's like, what is this? What does this all mean? What
Mm.
is it?
Mm.
What's the feeling? What can I do with this?
Yeah. So is this something you teach in therapy to the people you see, or how do you make that, or is it just your private practice? How does that show up in the therapy room? Is this something that you help people get in touch with, or?
I used to do a lot more inquiry when people were in office.
Yeah.
because I can really sit there with them, and they can't, their phone's not in the background, or their dog's not jumping around or whatever. Is that's one downfall of the video world, the virtual
Mhm.
world. I still will do it.
Mhm.
And I also will assign it. So I may do a session, and then, there's, one or two particular questions or a sequence of questions that I know is going to help them. And I'll say, this is the inquiry for the week, before you go to bed, when it's quiet, or in the middle of the night. Often, I think, people complain about not being able to sleep.
Mhm.
And studies show that we wake up a zillion times a night anyway. I mean, as adults, and the older you get, the worse it gets. And
I know.
I see that as an absolute perfect opportunity for meditation and inquiry, and really utilizing that silence, and the fact that the whole world is silent
Mm.
when you're, in the middle of the night,
Mm.
and you're not going to get up and do anything. It's a really good time to go into those questions. And oftentimes, once when you fall asleep, some of that will come out in your dreams.
Yeah, it does.
So
And
it's a rich time.
it can linger on when you wake up, so you have a kind of an echo into your
Yeah.
waking consciousness, so you can have some clues with you when you're in the middle of the night waking up, and kind of both dreaming and are awake at the same time.
Yeah.
So
I just want to say one other thing about that, both in waking time and in the middle of the night. When it comes to, let's say, a more contemplative way of living, I really encourage people, the moment that they are aware that they're in a state of rumination.
what does that mean?
M-
Ruminate.
m- Meaning, perseverating on some neuroses that they have, something that, I'm too fat, or
Okay.
I'm not smart enough, or I'm, whatever it is,
Okay.
people don't like me, whatever the things people ruminate about, which are vast,
Yeah, yeah. That's
infinite ruminations.
I call that the negative narrative that is keep
Yeah,
going on. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. The inner critic, the super ego voice.
yeah.
That the moment that you become aware of that, that's happening,
Mm.
right? That you intend for yourself to do something different,
Mm.
to realize that it's rumination. So whether you have the appropriate question that you're always going to be asking yourself, which is, some sort of intention of healing. How can I calm myself? How can I
Yeah.
redirect, positively redirect? What else can I put my mind on in this moment?
Mm.
So you're moving yourself out of that rumination, but also to be able to shift to a body awareness, right? So I'm ruminating right now. Can I move my prefrontal awareness to my breathing pattern,
Yeah.
and just start paying attention to that, and realizing that every time I'm aware that I'm ruminating, right?
Mm.
Different than just thinking,
Yeah.
different than planning, right? But ruminating,
Mm.
which, most people, once they understand the different concepts, they get, oh, this is a rumination, this isn't a healthy
Yeah.
thought process.
Mm.
Um, that the moment that happens, that you can shift into a body awareness first,
Mm.
and like moving your blood flow, right?
Yeah.
What's happening right now in my body? How can I shift this and move it toward an intention
Mm.
to heal,
Yeah.
in some way,
That's beautiful.
whether
It's
whether
really
it's internally or externally.
yeah.
Can I do something different on the outside to stop the rumination,
Mm.
or can I do something internally?
Mm. Yeah.
And I think that's honestly where, prayer, affirmations come in. For people who are not into any kind of spiritual thing,
Mm.
having some sort of mantra, like, even if it's your own made up affirmation that works for you,
Yeah.
that you know that you can go into that. I mean, this is why Buddhist monks, I mean, that's part of where that came from. Like, if you do 100,000 mantras,
Mm.
you've trained your mind.
Yeah.
You've
And you
trained your mind
spoke,
not to go to unhealthy
yeah,
aspects.
yeah. So that's when you go into some sometimes they call it one-pointed attention. You go into something so directly, so it suits the system because you're not going all over the place. You place your mind at one place for a while, and you start to relax. But what you were talking about, I think, is there's a little shift there in what you said that I think is really interesting. It's when you said when you realize you're ruminating, then you're no longer really ruminating anymore. You're really already in a shift. It's
Mhm.
really subtle, so you
Yeah.
can help yourself uh, see that. But before you do that, I think that's one of the things where it's kind of like the ruminating, the voice that's going on in the head, what everything is, the world is against me and everything is bad. Uh, you're identified with it, so you're not really aware of that that's
Mhm.
happening. So that little shift when you say, well, I'm ruminating, you're a little bit
Disidentifying.
identified. And to me, that is a really big paradigm shift in experience. And when people see that, a lot of good stuff can happen, because then you see the thoughts and feelings come and go, but I don't have to go and attach myself to them. So I think we'll have to go a little bit into some kind of spiritual talk, Shelley, because we're moving from client and therapist point of view and context, and finding way what works. I mean, one thing that you're saying is silence work. Silence is something healthy and healing, and then we come to meditation and contemplation and inquiry. So we're getting close to, I wouldn't say religion, but spirituality. And I know we both have an interest in, there's a language that not really connected to therapy, although it also is, where there's this phrase called non-duality. So for those who have never heard that, maybe you could say something about that and how we can see connections to what we are talking about. What would you say non-duality is? It's a hard question maybe to answer, but I'll give it a shot, Shelley.
Okay, I'll try. I think I don't know. I don't know that non-duality is actually the best
No?
English word to describe what my experience of it is anyway, because it's almost like it's not dual.
Mm.
It's not two. It's a well, it's, as you say, a one-pointedness, but it's actually not even one.
Yeah.
It's more like a full unity with
Non-defined.
everything, not one, not two, but all in a certain way. So it's like not a negation of two, but more an all-encompassing of everything.
Yeah. It's a tricky. Let's stay with it. It's like talking about silence. This is also
Mm-hmm.
language is a little too limited. You will never. That's the point of it. Language exists within this. So
Exactly.
if you start talking about it, you're kind of narrowing it down. But there's a lot of what I know, a lot of traditions that's way older than therapy that have been doing these things like meditations and wisdom traditions, where, as I understand, non-duality is maybe a big name, but they all have an element of what you're talking about: Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, where uh, there's an experience of not being separated from,
Yes.
not being a part, and then reality shows the outside and the inside, kind of like there's really no inside or outside. It's just one thing, one non-thing happening, but it's our perception that kind of creates illusion, or what, I don't know a good word for that either, but we're looking at life through straws, thinking we see everything.
Right. Or an illusion that creates a perception.
Yeah, illusion that creates perception. Yeah, you were talking about essence before. I think that's a word that kind of also shows up in these kind of context. Or sometimes I think nature is a good word. Life in itself, before it gets defined by us in different parts and stuff. Just the basic life energy or force. It's hard to talk about this without sounding.
It is, but you know, I think you're absolutely right about nature. I think that's probably the entryway for most people. And I mean, I know, you know, I live here at the beach in Santa Monica, and I walk every day.
So you
And
could say
so,
that
and
again. Well, it was a little bit of a lagging. I didn't hear you. What did you do every day?
I try to walk every day. And so I'm, you know, along the ocean, and there's something about, and it's the same is true in the forest. I know you spend a lot of time in the forest. You know, we wherever we are, that's, you know, where we find our nature. And when you're walking along the beach, a few things happen. One is that for me, you know, and I don't mean every time I walk on the beach, but I've had these deeply profound moments where time collapses in that I'm walking along a shoreline on the Pacific that my counterparts 30,000 years ago were walking along the same ocean, right? The shoreline may have been in a different place, but it's the same exact thing. So there's something about the human experience of time collapsing in that. And then in addition, because the ocean and sky, the ocean is so infinite, the sky is infinite, you can look at the ocean, you can just look at the ocean and see, oh, you know, the waves are glistening, or, you know, whatever, they're different every day, and you know, there's a certain temperature when you dip your toe in and whatever. But at a certain point, if you stay in the silence long enough, the ocean becomes you.
Mm.
So I mean, we know that perception is, you know, the vision of an ocean is in your cognitive structure, right? I mean, it's something that you see. If your eyes are closed, you don't see it. If you can't hear, you're not going to hear the waves. So it actually is inside of us. We at that level, we create the reality. And sometimes with presence and silence and a sort of depth of connection to the world we exist in, it can move from looking at it, hearing it, to becoming part of it, to it becoming you.
Yeah, life being with life, isn't it?
Yes, it's like, yes, it's inside of you. You are inside of it.
Mm.
And so I, you know, I think I think it can be the same way, peering into the sky, into the night sky, in you know, during the day. I just happen to experience it with the ocean, and you know, I grew up on the East Coast, and would not see the ocean very often, a couple hours away from it. But, you know, annual vacations, I would go there. And I was in touch with that at a young age. Some being actually feeling as though my being itself was somehow inside or intertwined
Mm.
with the ocean itself.
Beautiful. and this whole thing we're talking about is is connected to silence in some way. For me, it is. It's not activity. I'm not thinking or doing, and it's beautiful. When you're going with the ocean or in a beautiful forest, but it kind of looks like it has to be a really special moment. It is in one way, but isn't it also glimpses here and there? Where, because I think a good marker is time stopping. If you have the experience, whatever you do, that time stops. You're really in love with life for some reason. Maybe you're playing guitar or tennis, but you can have this kind of experience when you lose yourself for a while, and then you're back and you wonder, where did I go? What happened? Where did time go? But it's kind of like with the thought thing. We it's hard to see it when it happens, when you're over occupied in your head, and you have stress, or you have a lot of stuff on your plate and trying to do. But I was thinking, when we're talking about non-duality, it might sound like something really special, and you have to meditate real hard, or go to a beautiful beach, but it's also something very ordinary that can show up. I mean, just holding a baby, if looking at it, and you can be gone for a while. It's really these intense but relaxed life experiences where you kind of, the personality takes a pause.
Yes, exactly. You disidentify from your identities in the world.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the sort of Buddhist meditation, maybe shamatha, as it's called, but without object, where you're, or Dzogchen meditation, where your eyes are open, and so you're actually, you have your visual awareness, and then after 20 to 30 minutes, what starts to happen, it's a very, I mean, if people actually sit long enough, what starts to happen is your visual field starts to go away. So from the edges, even though your eyes are open, it starts to gray out, and it starts to kind of not complete black. It's really, my experience anyway, is it's more like a gray, like your visual field just kind of goes away. And so you're sitting in your home, let's just say, but something completely different. The absorption creates a completely different awareness.
Yeah. And it's I just encourage people to if this is sounding really strange, try it and see from
Right.
from your own experience point of view, because I know that when we're talking about it, it's really hard to put it into words, but there's something in it that's really helpful. I kind of think of it like just regular meditation, because that's a lot of people's practice. It's like restarting your system sometimes. It's really a nice experience. You don't have to figure out things, just be with that, or watch your thoughts, or whatever you do as a practice. It's, and well, if we're talking about what works, this seemed to work, and people have been doing it for thousands of years. Maybe it's worth a shot to try if you have a lot of stuff going on in yourself or in your body. So
It is worth trying it, but I will say that, in keeping with American corporate values, the mindfulness movement has really it has taken over, and there's, pros and cons of that. I mean, the pros are, people are understanding that, yeah, it's good for stress relief, and it's good to get a handle of seeing the identities and how your personality structures show up in the world and all of those things. But I think, my understanding is when they brought it through Cambridge, right? They had to strip it of anything spiritual to be able to put it in a medical model, if you will. And I think that's a huge miss. I think it is a huge miss to not be in a place of humility to a teacher, for instance, or teachers, in my case, it's teachers, because I've had a number of really, really amazing teachers throughout my life that I call upon and invoke when I'm in certain states and places. But also to have an intention of the whole process of meditation being about elevating yourself to have compassion for others, not to have less stress at work so you're more productive. This is what Americans, this is what we've done to it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important thing, and especially here in West LA, this is like the yogini capital of the world, and everybody has glittery love t-shirts on and whatever, and there's a lot of spiritual bypassing, and people say they meditate, but because it's stripped of a certain level of humility and honoring of the teachers that we need to honor, and a level of being empathic and compassionate to others in the world, including all others if possible.
Mm.
That those messages somehow got left out.
Mm.
And I think it's a real miss, and I think it's an important thing for people, going into the mindfulness-based stress reduction model and getting, so many people are getting trained, so many therapists even, I know a lot of therapists. I was head of our psychotherapy association here in Los Angeles, where we have 5,000 therapists.
Mm.
And a lot of individuals get this training and they have it on their website and they proudly display it and they talk about it. And if you sit in a guided meditation with them, it's very clear that the places that it's supposed to be reaching they're not even, they're not even in the field. I mean, it's a completely different thing. So while it's better than nothing,
Better than nothing, or maybe a start, because every time you take something out of context, you lose some kind of quality. But I think that if you start to do stuff like that and you see you're not your thoughts and you disidentify, you will eventually start wondering, well, who am I if I'm not that? And then you sometimes need someone to talk to, because that can be a scary place if you really identify with some patterns and personality stuff. So you can be a bit lost in that. But that's another conversation, because I'm looking at the time now, Shelley, and it's just, we lost time. We did it. So I think it's time to just slow down and just see. I just want to check with you if there's something that I just ran away from that you wanted to say something more about, or do you think it's okay to stop here? And I just want to check in, so I'm so eager. I could talk with you an hour more, 1 hour more, but maybe we'll talk another time too. But
yeah, I'd love that.
just something that was a little bit too hasty or so.
No, and I just want to honor your work, Johnny. I know you're an expert in your field in Sweden, and I've so appreciated the conversations we've had since we met many years ago, and I also appreciate the humility you bring to, let's say, this conversation, because we're equals. It's and so I honor that in you, and your openness and your curiosity, because you've shared with me that while I have some reservations about the therapy field in this country, in California, where I think we have 80 to 100,000 therapists just in our state. I think there are close to 100,000 in our state, and 30 to 50,000 in the rest of the country, of the United States. I'm not positive about that statistic, but it's something like that.
Like that, yeah.
So in a sense, in the Western world, we kind of set the stage. And I mean, licensed marriage and family therapy started in California in the 50s as a response to the high divorce rate, you know, not needing to be a medical doctor, a psychiatrist to be able to do therapy. You know, I have my reservations about some of what's done, and how we as therapists unwittingly collude with people's egos by being too empathetic and not direct enough. And I know you have some reservations about maybe the lack of transpersonal exploration in your world.
Yeah.
And I think conversations like this are so important, because you know, we get to speak our minds in a way that otherwise don't get written about and don't
Yeah.
get spoken about. So I thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and really appreciate your intelligence and expertise.
That's very nice of you. And I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm curious, and that goes a pretty long way. So thank you for being curious with me. And I love talking to you, Shelley. We'll talk again, I'm sure. So thank you so much for doing this today. Okay, is this the end? We'll stop there.
It's
Okay.
my pleasure, and thank you for your
Thank you.
collegiality and friendship, and we'll talk again.
We'll talk again. Thank you. Bye.